Ready to explore some seriously mind-bending ideas? Today we're taking a deep dive into the nature of reality itself.
Whoa, that's a big one.
It is. And to help us unpack it all, we're going to be looking at a YouTube conversation between Deepak Chopra and Donald Hoffman.
Oh, wow, that's a fascinating pairing.
Right. They're both these incredible thinkers who blend science and spirituality, which I think makes their perspectives even more interesting.
Definitely, their backgrounds bring such a unique lens to these questions.
Yeah, and they tackle some really big questions in this conversation, like if reality is a kind of virtual reality, how do we explain stuff like mental illness or suffering?
Yeah, those are tough ones.
And what about physicists saying that space-time might not even be fundamental like we always thought?
Okay, yeah, now we're getting into some seriously trippy territory.
I know it's enough to make your head spin. So, to help us unpack all of this, Hoffman uses this really cool metaphor of a VR headset to describe our experience of reality.
Oh, I like that.
He argues that our senses don't actually show us reality as it is. They just give us this simplified interface.
So it's like our senses are kind of filtering things, giving us just the highlights.
Exactly. And Hoffman's point is that this interface isn't about showing us the truth. It's about giving us information that's helpful for survival.
Okay, that makes sense. Our senses help us navigate the world and avoid danger.
Right, but then Hoffman takes it a step further. He suggests that this whole VR experience could be a way for a single unified consciousness to explore limitations and learn about itself.
So like we're all characters in some kind of cosmic simulation.
That's one way to think about it, and Chopra actually builds on this by talking about the importance of contrast for any experience to exist.
Like light and dark, up and down, good and evil.
Exactly. You wouldn't know happiness without sadness or good without evil. It gives our experience depth.
That's a really interesting perspective.
But it also leads to another question. If we're all part of this unified consciousness, then why is there so much suffering in the world? Why mental illness?
That's a really important question.
Like, does it serve some purpose in this grand scheme of things?
Well, Hoffman suggests that mental illness could actually be a kind of prompt for the unified consciousness to like wake up and see beyond the limitations of this VR headset.
A wake-up call to the bigger picture.
Right. And Chopra adds to this by saying that liberation isn't about freeing the individual, but freeing us from the limitations of our individual selves.
So it's about letting go of our ego.
In a way, yeah. He's saying that our sense of self is just a temporary process, not the whole story.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these ideas challenge our usual way of thinking about ourselves and the world.
For sure. They're definitely pushing the boundaries.
But then they bring up something that really blew my mind. Physicists are now saying that space-time might not even be as fundamental to reality as we thought.
Wait, what? That's crazy.
I know, it's a huge paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Basically, they're finding that there could be structures and laws beyond space-time governing the universe at an even deeper level.
So there's something even more fundamental than space-time.
It seems that way, and Hoffman suggests that his own research, which focuses on conscious agents, could be mapped onto these new structures called decorated permutations.
Decorated permutations? I've never even heard of that.
Me neither, but it sounds super complex.
Can we break that down a bit?
Yeah, so imagine a giant tapestry where each thread represents a conscious agent.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And the way these threads are woven together, that creates the fabric of reality as we experience it.
Okay, I'm with you.
So these decorated permutations are like the underlying patterns in that tapestry, the hidden structure that determines how the threads interact and create the overall design.
So it's like the blueprint for reality.
Exactly.
That's a cool way to think about it.
And this leads to Hoffman's discovery about how observation works in his model.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
In his mathematical framework, to observe something means to fully participate in it, not just to stand apart as a detached observer.
That's interesting. It's like we're not just passively watching, we're actively involved.
Right. And this leads to what he calls a non-Boolean logic of observation.
Non-Boolean. What's that?
So instead of a simple on or off switch, imagine a dimmer switch with a whole range of possibilities between true and false.
Oh, I see. So things aren't so black and white.
Exactly. There's more nuance, more shades of gray.
And Chopra finds parallels between this and ancient Indian spiritual traditions about how thought emerges.
Oh, really?
He describes these 4 stages, starting with pure potentiality, then moving to a cloud of probabilities, then internal dialogue, and finally culminating in spoken words.
So it's like watching an idea unfold from its subtlest beginnings to its full expression in the world.
Exactly. It's a fascinating process.
And it suggests that we're constantly participating in the creation of reality through our thoughts and observations.
And that brings us to another point that Chopra brings up, the quantum master equation.
Okay, hold on a second. What is a quantum master equation?
Hmm.
And why should I even care?
Good questions, you should care, because this equation governs how quantum systems behave over time.
Okay, but what does that even mean?
It could unlock a deeper understanding of how the whole universe evolves at a quantum level.
Whoa, that's a lot to process.
I know, it's groundbreaking stuff. Think of it like a universal law that applies to everything from tiny atoms to giant galaxies.
So it's explaining how everything changes and evolves over time.
Essentially, yes. But
Right.
even with this equation, Chopra emphasizes that we still don't fully understand what causes these changes.
Oh, so there's still more to uncover.
Definitely. And there's another catch.
What's that?
This equation still assumes that space-time exists,
Right.
which, as we discussed earlier, might not be as fundamental as we once thought.
So even with these huge advancements in physics, there are still mysteries to unravel.
Always more to learn.
It seems like every answer just leads to more questions. And now I'm even more curious to hear what Chopra has to say about challenging the very foundations of science. But I think we're going to have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so after that deep dive into space-time and consciousness, I have to admit I'm still processing everything.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
It raises some pretty big questions, like, if reality is this kind of simulation, does that mean our choices don't really matter?
Oh, that's a good question, one that a lot of people have.
Can we just go around doing whatever we want? No consequences.
Well, the conversation between Chopra and Hoffman actually touches on this ethical question.
So what do they say? Is it a free-for-all in the simulation?
Not exactly. Hoffman suggests that the purpose of the simulation might be to help the unified consciousness wake up to its true nature.
So even if it's a simulation, there are still consequences to our actions.
It seems that way. Hoffman uses this really powerful image to illustrate it. He says Deepak and Jennifer are just me talking to myself through different avatars.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Right.
So is he saying that harming another person is ultimately harming yourself?
That's the implication, and Chopra echoes this by suggesting that love is another word for this sense of non-duality, this understanding that we are all interconnected.
Okay. I can see how that could lead to a more compassionate and ethical way of living.
Definitely, it shifts the perspective.
But I have another question. We were talking about Hoffman's model of consciousness, where he says that observation isn't passive.
Right, we're participating in shaping reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in with the idea of a unified consciousness? Are we all co-creating this simulation together?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of things.
Are we all just playing our parts in some pre-programmed script?
Both Chopra and Hoffman seem to be saying that there's this underlying unity to existence,
Okay.
but they also acknowledge that individual consciousness plays a role in shaping our experiences.
So it's not all predetermined. We have some say in how things unfold.
It seems that way, and this leads to even more questions like, what's the balance between individual choice and the purpose of the simulation? How much free will do we really have?
And if our observations are shaping reality, what does that mean for how we do science?
Ah, another good one.
If we're not neutral observers but active participants in creating what we observe.
Right.
So that means scientific objectivity is kind of an illusion?
You're hitting on a really important point. Chopra argues that science is limited by the very questions it asks.
Okay.
He even suggests that some of the fundamental questions we ask might be the wrong ones.
So if those are the wrong questions, what are the right ones?
That's the million-dollar question. I think both Chopra and Hoffman would say we're still figuring that out.
Okay, so it's a work in progress.
Definitely. But maybe the first step is being willing to let go of our old assumptions and being open to new ways of thinking.
That makes sense. It's easy to get stuck in our old ways of seeing things.
For sure.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a moment. How do these big, mind-blowing concepts actually relate to our everyday lives?
Well, for one thing, it encourages us to question the solidity of the physical world.
The solidity.
Yeah, if what we perceive as reality is just an interface, a projection of something deeper, it changes how we relate to our environment.
So instead of thinking of ourselves as separate from nature, we start to recognize our interconnectedness with everything.
Exactly, and that can have a huge impact on how we treat the planet, how we think about sustainability, how we value all forms of life.
It's a shift from an us versus them mentality to a sense of shared responsibility.
Right. It's a more holistic perspective.
I can see how that would lead to a more compassionate and responsible way of living.
Definitely.
But what about our own inner world? How does this understanding affect our sense of self and our well-being?
Remember what Chopra said about liberation being from the person, not of the person?
Yes.
That suggests true freedom comes from letting go of our rigid ego-based identities.
So instead of clinging to this fixed idea of who we are,
Right.
we learn to embrace the fluidity of all experience.
Precisely. And maybe we even come to see that our sense of self is just one small facet of a much larger consciousness.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is, but it can also be incredibly liberating.
But does that mean we just become passive, letting go of our individuality and going with the flow?
Not necessarily. It's about finding a balance between recognizing our interconnectedness and still taking responsibility for our actions within this simulated reality.
So we're not just puppets in some cosmic play.
It seems that way. Perhaps our role is to awaken to our true nature, to become more conscious participants in this grand unfolding of reality.
But how do we actually do that? How do we move beyond the limitations of this VR headset and experience that deeper level of reality?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? I think there are many different paths and practices that can help us.
Like what?
Things like meditation, mindfulness, contemplation, even certain scientific inquiries can help us expand our awareness.
So it's about training our minds to see beyond the limitations of our everyday perceptions.
Exactly.
Okay.
That makes sense. And by doing so, we might discover a whole new dimension of freedom and possibility, one that goes beyond time, space, and even our individual identities.
That's a pretty inspiring thought.
It is.
But I'm also curious about the more practical implications of these ideas.
Like what?
Does this understanding change how we approach things like work relationships, even our daily routines?
Absolutely. I think it has the potential to transform every aspect of our lives.
For example?
Well, in our relationships, it could lead to deeper empathy and compassion.
Deeper empathy.
Yeah, if we recognize that other people aren't separate from us, but reflections of ourselves.
Reflections of ourselves.
It changes how we interact with them.
So instead of seeing others as separate individuals, we start to see them as extensions of our own being.
In a sense, yes. And that could change how we communicate, how we resolve conflicts, how we build genuine connection.
It's a whole new way of relating to each other.
It is. It's a shift from seeing relationships as transactions to seeing them as opportunities for growth and understanding.
That's a beautiful way to put it. What about work? Does this understanding change how we approach our careers?
I think it encourages us to find work that aligns with our deepest values and purpose.
Okay.
If we're not just trying to survive or accumulate wealth, but to contribute to the awakening of consciousness,
Right.
it could lead us to pursue work that's more meaningful.
So it's not just about climbing the corporate ladder or chasing external success.
It's about finding work that feels aligned with our soul's purpose.
It sounds like a pretty spiritual approach to work.
It is, and I think that's what's so exciting about this conversation between Chopra and Hoffman.
What do you mean?
They're bridging the gap between science and spirituality, showing us that these two realms aren't separate,
Okay.
but complementary ways of understanding the universe.
It's like they're weaving together a new tapestry of reality.
Exactly, one that incorporates both the rigor of science and the depth of spiritual wisdom.
And we're all invited to participate in this grand weaving rite.
Absolutely. Each of us contributes our own unique threads to the ever-evolving tapestry of reality.
That's a beautiful image, and it leads to another question. If reality is this fluid, co-created tapestry,
Yes.
what does it mean for our understanding of time?
Is time as linear and fixed as we perceive it to be?
Now we're getting into some really deep waters. I know my brain is already starting to melt.
So-
So let's dive in. Remember Hoffman's point about the arrow of time being an artifact of our perception?
Right. He suggests it's not a fundamental feature of reality, but a result of how we experience the world through this VR headset.
So if we combine that with Chopra's insights about interconnectedness, we start to get a very different picture of time.
Exactly. It's not just a straight line from past to present to future, but something much more fluid and multidimensional.
So instead of a straight line, is it more like a spiral, a web, a multidimensional matrix?
Perhaps all of the above. If reality is ultimately a unified field of consciousness, then past, present, and future might all be coexisting in some way.
Whoa, that's mind-bending. If the past isn't really gone and the future isn't set in stone, could we access different points in time? Through, like, expanded states of consciousness?
That's a question that mystics and spiritual traditions have explored for centuries.
Interesting.
Some believe that through practices like meditation, we can tap into a timeless realm where past, present, and future merge.
Wow, that's getting pretty deep. It's like time becomes a landscape we can navigate rather than a track we're forced to follow.
It's a powerful concept.
But hold on, if we're talking about time as this fluid, interconnected dimension, does that mean things like free will and choice become irrelevant?
That's the paradox, isn't it? How do we reconcile the idea of a unified consciousness with individual choice?
Right. It's a tough one.
Philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with this for ages, and now science is entering the conversation too.
How so?
Well, theories about quantum entanglement and non-locality suggest that our choices might be interconnected in ways we don't fully grasp.
So it's all connected in ways we don't yet understand.
It seems that way. It's all very mysterious, but I think the main takeaway is that our understanding of time choice and free will is likely far more complex than we realize.
So we need to upgrade our mental operating system, so to speak.
Exactly. Expand our awareness to accommodate these larger possibilities.
But how do we do that?
That's where practices like mindfulness and meditation can be so valuable. They help us step outside our habitual ways of thinking and open us up to new experiences and understanding.
It's like training our minds to see beyond the limitations of that VR headset,
Exactly.
to catch glimpses of the deeper reality that lies beneath the surface.
And by doing so, we might just discover a whole new dimension of freedom and possibility, one that transcends the limitations of time, space, and even our own individual identities.
This is all incredibly inspiring, but I have to admit it's also a lot to take in.
I know it's a lot.
I feel like I need some time to let these ideas sink in.
That's a wise approach. These are concepts that unfold gradually, revealing new layers of meaning over time.
You're right, it's not about grasping everything at once, but about allowing the mystery to guide us deeper.
Exactly. It's a journey of discovery.
Well, I'm definitely feeling guided. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole, I think it's time to bring our deep dive back to the surface for now.
Agreed. We've covered a lot of ground, and it's good to give ourselves time to digest these ideas.
But this isn't the end of our exploration. We'll be back soon for the third and final part of our deep dive into the nature of reality. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the nature of reality.
I'm ready to wrap this up.
Me too. But before we do that, there's one more piece from the conversation that I wanted to explore.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's Hoffman's analogy about the pixels on a computer screen.
I remember that one.
He was saying how some pixels might give us clues about consciousness, while others don't.
Right, but they're all just pixels within a larger system.
Exactly, and it got me thinking about the distinctions we make between living and non-living things, or conscious and unconscious processes. Are those lines really so clear?
That's a really good point. It's something that comes up a lot when we start questioning the nature of reality.
Right, like if everything is ultimately part of this unified field of consciousness,
Like Hoffman says.
then maybe the way we categorize things is more about our limited perception than actual reality.
It could be that we're imposing those categories onto a reality that's much more fluid and interconnected.
So even things we consider inanimate could be part of this web of consciousness.
It's a possibility, and it challenges our assumptions about the world in a big way.
It really does, and it raises some interesting questions about evolution, too.
Oh, yeah, like how does evolution work if time itself is a product of consciousness?
Exactly. Hoffman even mentioned that natural selection, as we understand it, might not be the driving force of evolution.
That's a pretty radical idea.
I know, but it makes you think about things differently.
It does. If time isn't fundamental, then maybe evolution isn't this linear progression through time.
Right. Maybe it's more like a dance of consciousness unfolding in ways we can't fully grasp.
A dance of consciousness. I like that.
But if consciousness is leading this dance, where is it going? What's the ultimate goal?
That's the big mystery, isn't it? And I think Chopra and Hoffman would both say we don't have the answers.
Right.
And maybe we never will, but that doesn't mean we stop searching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it can feel overwhelming when the very foundation of reality seems to be shifting beneath our feet.
I can understand that.
So how do we even begin to explore these ideas when everything we thought we knew is up for grabs?
I think it requires a willingness to embrace uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, to let go of our attachment to fixed ideas and be open to new ways of seeing the world.
It's like we're stepping off the edge of the map and trusting that we'll land somewhere.
Exactly. It's a leap of faith.
And a pretty exciting one at that.
Oh, yeah. It's a grand adventure.
You know, there's one more thing that's been on my mind throughout this whole conversation.
What's that?
If everything is part of this unified consciousness, Does that mean our individual selves are an illusion?
That's the paradox of non-duality, and it's a question that's been debated for a long time.
Right. Like Chopra said, liberation is from the person, not of the person.
Exactly. He's pointing to the idea that our true nature is beyond the limitations of our individual egos.
And Hoffman said that Deepak and Jennifer are just aspects of himself speaking through different avatars.
Right. It suggests that our sense of separateness might be more of a filter than an ultimate reality.
So we're like individual waves in a vast ocean.
Yeah.
Each wave is unique, but ultimately inseparable from the ocean itself.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It captures the essence of non-duality.
But if that's true, what happens when the wave crashes on the shore?
You're asking the big questions now.
Does that individual consciousness just disappear?
That's another one of those mysteries that we might not be able to fully grasp.
Right.
Some spiritual traditions believe in reincarnation, where consciousness keeps evolving through lifetimes.
Okay.
Others talk about emerging back into the source, a dissolution of the individual self into the universal consciousness.
It's all pretty mysterious,
It is.
but it's strangely comforting to think that even if our individual forms disappear, consciousness itself continues.
It's a humbling thought, and it encourages us to live with a sense of reverence for all of life.
Recognizing that each being is an expression of this universal consciousness.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've reached the depths of our deep dive for today.
We've certainly explored a lot of ground.
My mind is buzzing with new ideas.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for joining me on this journey.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to our deep dive into the nature of reality. Keep questioning, exploring, and embracing the mystery. Until next time,